ISGAN is the short name for the International Smart Grid Action Network, a technology collaboration program of the International Energy Agency. ISGAN is also an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, formally established in 2011. ISGAN creates a strategic platform to support high-level government attention and action for the accelerated development and deployment of smarter and cleaner electricity grids around the world. ISGAN consists of 27 contracting parties. Their nominated representatives form the executive committee that is headed by the presidium and assisted by 2 co-secretariats. ISGAN's vision is to accelerate progress on key aspects of smart grid policy, technology, and investment through the voluntary participation by governments in projects and programs. ISGAN activities focus on 5 principal areas: policy standards and regulation, finance and business models, technology system development, workforce skills and knowledge, user and consumer engagement. ISGAN facilitates dynamic knowledge sharing, technical assistance, peer review, and project coordination among its contracted parties. The ISGAN value proposition relies on conferences and workshops, policy and technology briefs, discussion and technical paper, casebooks, and webinars like this one. Within ISGAN, virtual learning offers the ISGAN community means of rational and continuous technical skills update in the fields of smart grids. The virtual learning is proposed as a set of e-learning and reading core modules dealing with the entire value chain of smart grids. The webinar of today concerns how enticing residential customers to become electricity flexibility providers. Many studies have attested the manifold barriers that residential customers find to become providers of flexibility services. Our research with consumers show unmet needs that can be tapped to create value to consumers. In the BeFlexible project, 5 value propositions have been proposed that can be used to sell flexibility services to residential customers. The speakers of today's webinar are Valeria Moreno, Assistant Researcher at University of Pontifical Comillas University and the Institute of Research in Technology of the Pontifical University in Madrid. Carmen Valor, Professor at the Universidad Pontificia Comillas and also researcher at the Institute of Research in Technology, and is not a speaker today, but is also an author of this research, Leonor Ruiz from SoulSite. Please use the question and answer tool to pose your question. The speaker will answer to your question in the roundtable at the end of their presentation. And as usual, the recording of this webinar will be available in the ISGAN YouTube channel. Okay, now I leave the floor to Valeria to start with the webinar. Thank you for joining and enjoy this webinar.
Let's start. Hello, everyone. So today we'll be diving deep into the concept of flexibility in the power system and different value propositions for residential consumers. We'll begin with an introduction to what flexibility means. We'll then explore the flexsummer concept and the challenges or barriers that come with providing flexibility. And finally, we'll focus on the value framework, value propositions, and conclude with some valuable takeaways. So let's start with the definition of flexibility. Flexibility is the power system's ability to handle with variability and uncertainty introduced by renewable energy generation. This considers different timescale from the very short term to the long term, and the goal is to avoid the curtailment of renewables and supply all the energy demands to customers. This is the definition by Karina. So let's break down this further. So what is flexibility? Flexibility is the ability to adjust supply and demand all the time. We need this balance all the time. What do we need it for? To achieve this balance, matching supply and demand and maintaining energy flows within safe network limits. Yes, this is as the introduction of what is flexibility and what do we need it for, and why do we need it? Why do we need flexibility? Because as our grid are evolving and we are incorporating more renewable energy sources like wind or solar photovoltaic, their variable nature demands more flexibility. See, yes. So this ensures that power generations can align with demand. This is why we need that our power system be flexible. And how can we obtain this flexibility? Well, there are two main approaches, two main ways to obtain it. One way is from the supply side management, which include, for example, thermal power plants or hydropower. And on the other hand, we have the demand side management, which can include different programs like demand response programs, which include industrial, commercial, and residential customers. So we have these two different approaches, and we are going to focus into demand side management for flexibility. So let's focus on these demand response programs. This refers to balancing the demand on power grids by encouraging customers to shift electricity demand to times when electricity is more plentiful or other demand is lower. Yes, typically through prices or monetary incentives. This is the definition of demand response programs, and we're going to focus on these kind of programs. And here we have two main mechanisms in order to obtain this flexibility from the customers. First, we have the price-based programs or implicit demand response, in which in these programs, they use price signals and different tariffs to incentivize consumers to shift consumption. Yes, this is the price-based program. And in the other hand, we have incentive-based programs or explicit demand response, which make direct payments to the consumers or maybe discounts on the bill, who shift their demands. So we have these two mechanisms, and this generates a new paradigm in the electricity market, because the consumer, the customer of electricity, now becomes a provider of flexibility. And we have this new actor, the flexibility service provider. And we are going to deep in this concept. The flexibility service provider, we can call them the flexumer, and we have basically two types of flexummers. A high load flexibility service provider, which includes mostly industrial and commercial customers. And on the other hand, we have small load flexibility service providers, which include residential and small commercial customers. The focus of the study is the small load flexibility service providers. So this is a representation of the value change in the explicit flexibility demand response programs. We have the active customer, which is the FlexSummer. This customer could be industrial, commercial, or residential, as I said. And here we have the introduction of a new actor, the aggregator. The aggregator have a new role. The aggregator is like a bridge between this customer, this flexibility service provider, and the complexity, the complex energy market with different actors like the DSO, TSO. So the aggregators, like I say, it's like a bridge, and this actor aggregate multiples residential customers or small load flexibility service providers in order that they could participate in the flexibility market. So this is how the system works. And of course, like in any innovative approach, there are some barriers to widespread adoption. And when customers anticipate more cost, challenges, or barriers than gains, for example, of course, their willingness to participate in flexibility provision is curtailed. So what we have to address these barriers and understand these difficulties of the customers. And we need to create a more favorable environment for customer engagement. Yes, this is the main objective on looking for the barriers. And as I say, there are different barriers. We can start for the first one is changing habits, because altering established routines poses a challenge for these customers, for these small load flexibility providers. And certain household practices provide are more people resist more to change some practices than others. For example, the time at which they have dinner, and for example, in countries like Italy or France, this is really hard to change. So this is one of the main barriers that we find in order to include these small providers into the market. Then the perception of reduced comfort. This is another important barrier, particularly regarding to heating practices, because heating at home is considered non-negotiable. And if the customers anticipate some discomfort, if they change the temperature levels, they won't participate in this kind of programs. Another barrier is the limited understanding or misconception about flexibility, because of course all this system is the energy system is complex, and the understanding of the system and how flexibility works could be a great barrier for these providers. And then mistrust. So as I say, the complexity of the energy markets and several past crises have fostered mistrust. And people have concerns about personal data. So this generates a great barrier for this kind of programs. And we have another barrier, and I have to introduce the concept of flexibility capital. Flexibility capital is the ability to be flexible, and it is affected by different socio-technical factors. And here we have that people with more flexibility capital and more financial resource, they could offer flexibility capital, but they are not really interested in these programs because they don't see really benefit for them. But in the opposite, we have some, for example, families with fewer financial resources and less flexibility capital, which are more interested in participate in these programs, but they don't have the flexibility capital that they need in order to enter into this kind of programs. And then we have some barriers that not related directly with the customer, the end consumer, the residential consumer, but they are barriers that are a challenge in the system. We have regulatory or policymaking barriers. For example, limited government support or incentives in the energy transition, the regulatory frameworks related to energy communities, they are not clear, or there are any framework, and restrictions to flexibility trade agreements and to use of trade platforms. These are some important barriers. Then from the aggregator or retailer side, they have lack of standardization of market interfaces across different countries, lack of software solution platforms to quantify the current and future flexibility capacity of these resources, and aggregators has a limited direct access to the customers. And finally, we have DSO, TSO barriers, like limited coordination between DSO and TSO for the use of flexibility. The platforms could be a barrier. They don't have maybe the personnel with skills and competencies that the system needs, and some organizational capabilities to manage the flexibility service. So the objective of this is to increase the perceived value that the end consumer, these small lot flexibility service providers could see in this kind of programs, by enhancing the anticipated gains and minimizing the anticipated barriers. So this is the main objective. And now Mamen is going to present the following slides.
So thanks a lot, Valeria. So to address this challenge, we did two things. So first we enter into a theory or a framework that allows understanding how value is perceived and formed. And then we did a field work with consumers that I will explain later, and analyzing these interviews using these lenses allow us to identify value propositions for residential users. So these are the key three elements or axioms that guided our work. So the first thing, next slide, sorry, Valeria. So the first thing is the centrality of value. So this notion of value is at the core of market. So market exists because they produce value. And it's important to realize that value is co-created. So it's not that consumers accept, but it's because consumers do something that value is created. And this is clearly in the case of flexibility provision. So, however, companies are the ones offering value propositions, and users or consumers can only accept or reject them. And another key element is the notion of perceived value. So people will enter into a relationship with a provider if they anticipate that benefits will be greater than costs. Another thing that is important is that value is multifaceted, and this was very clear in our study. So it's kind of obvious that flexibility provision can provide economic value for users because they will get an incentive, be it a direct payment or a discount on their bills. But we identified other forms of value provision. So for one of the things that they were looking for is social value. So helping their communities, contributing to making communities more resilient was an important motivation or benefit, anticipated benefit that motivated them to participate. So for instance, this could take so some were willing to give their flexibility away for nothing to their town council, for instance, or to their village, so that they can, to the library, for instance, to power the library, so that they could get liberate public budget to invest in other things, or just to help people that are disadvantaged in their community. So some people were willing not to get the incentives themselves and pass them on to other people. For others, environmental or ethical value was a key motive to participate. So this would imply if they anticipate lesser emissions, or they anticipate a fair or a fairer, a more just energy system with better ethical practices, for them, this was motivation enough to provide flexibility. For others, episteme value. So can you go back? Sorry, Valeria. Episteme value was the another motive or another value sought is learning. So because energy is so difficult to understand for consumers, is so obscure and complex. So just learning what creates consumption and how to reduce consumption, learning from flexibility provision was also a motive to participate. For others was having greater control and autonomy. So being independent from grids was a very important motive for many consumers, and also having more control over their production and their consumption was also a powerful benefit or anticipated benefit. And finally, identity. So for some people, participating in these innovative practices or socio-technical innovations was and projecting the idea of being a pioneer, and also with accompanying emotions such as pride and satisfaction was also a motive to participate. An important thing is that although value is multifaceted, and people may so when we talk about the individual wise, some of these forms of value combine in different ways. So for some people, relationships are additive. So if I have economic, episteme, and control, I have more reason to participate. But for others, relationships are non-compensatory. So I don't care about social environmental value. If you don't give me an economic incentive, I will ever participate in these schemes. And for others, there were compensatory relations. So they would trade off an incentive in exchange for helping some of their neighbors, for instance, or the town council. So moving on to the second axiom. Value is co-created by actors, and the process where value is created is called resource integration. And there are 3 stages in this process. So the first stage is matching. So matching is the stage where actors analyze their resources and make a decision to integrate them in the future. This process is affected by 2 considerations. So users need to have the resources, so they must be able to integrate them later, and they need to be willing to integrate them. And as we saw in Valeria's presentation, here we find some barriers. So you cannot be a flexumer unless you have certain equipment, because not all the so unless you have like high loads, you are not very relevant as a flexumer. So the cost or the incentive that we need to pay in exchange for small loads make the system unsustainable. So you need to have equipment such as, I don't know, PVs or an EV charger or electrical heating and cooling systems. Otherwise, you are not eligible for this process of resource integration. For some people, the limited ability to deal with the technology is also a barrier for this. So they may have the equipment, they may have a smart thermostat, for instance, but just dealing with devices is too much for them and they don't want to participate. For others, they don't trust market actors. So because providing flexibility entails giving control of the device to someone else, if they don't trust this someone else, they are not willing to participate. And they also anticipate certain risks, like what happens if I committed my flexibility and then I need power? What will happen then? Or what happens if this is a special cold day and I need the heating on and I cannot have it? So they anticipate a lot of risks before even started, before joining the programs or starting providing flexibility. And then in the second stage is when resources are integrated. So in this, to enable this, we need to install a set of devices and an ICT system that connects the aggregator with the consumer, typically by means of an app and smart devices. So essentially, you sign up to provide flexibility for a time and a day and probably a time. And you will need to give control of this device to the aggregator. So if your flexibility is needed, they will suspend access to this device. And here are problems. There are problems as well because technologies are in beta phase, so they fail. It's difficult to ensure the connectivity. Maybe your smart charger is not adequate for this app, or maybe you don't get a Wi-Fi signal in the charging point, and therefore we cannot link it. And also, as Valeria said, the coordination among actors is very difficult, and it also demands skills that they may not have developed because for the old business or the other business model, it was not necessary, but for this one is super important because you need these negotiation skills. So all these barriers impede the resourcing stage. And then the valuing. So consumers anticipate less value because so for instance, with environmental value, it's very difficult for them to visualize the value they are creating. So we know that flexibility reduces emissions because it enables the use of renewable energies, but for consumers, it's very difficult to visualize the actual environmental impact of their provision of flexibility. Also, the payments are for some insignificant, and as Valeria said, they are more insignificant. So there's a paradox because the ones with the equipment are the ones that anticipate less economic value, because the payments are very small for them to engage in this discomfort, or to go through this discomfort of providing flexibility. And also, even when there's a payment, the emotional and time costs are considered greater than the potential benefits, and they don't want to participate. And there are also justice concerns. So even when you can entice some consumers with this social value, so giving away your flexibility to disadvantage others, which of course is not true. I mean, is not the way they work. It's like a symbolic thing where you provide this load and you are told that this load goes to someone else in the form of a discount. If they they realize or understand that someone else is making a profit out of it, then they get very angry, and because they feel that the deal is not fair and they are not getting their share. So a third consideration that guided our work is the centrality of value proposition. So eventually, as we said at the beginning, markets work because there are some vendors that make value propositions and consumers that accept these value propositions. When they accept them, they start the resource integration process. If during the resource integration process they are dissatisfied, they will stop accepting the value proposition. So this is the definition of value proposition. I corrected price with incentive, because in flexibility with flexumers, they don't have to pay, they are paid for providing this service. And the tool that is widely used to define this value proposition is called the value proposition canvas. So it's very useful. It allows you to understand the gains and pains and customer jobs. To get a form of value, customers have to do certain jobs, and some of these jobs may be neutral, but some of them may be painful for consumers. So they affect them negatively, or they perceive that they affect them negatively. And in carrying out these jobs, they may get some gains. They may get emotional gains, identity gains, epistemic gains. So when we define the value proposition, we have to ensure that we are providing gains and relieving pains. And this notion is what we applied in this study. So what we did is that we did many interviews with residential consumers in different countries, and there were nuances among them, but there were also regularities, and this is what we are focusing on. And we also did co-creation sections with energy market actors, such as people or representatives from DCOs, TCOs, aggregators, etc., and regulators. And then we only talked to consumers that had flexibility capital. So they needed to have, they had like three conditions: that they have their equipment, so they had PVs or EV chargers or electrical heating and cooling, but they had different equipment, and they had technological skills to manage this equipment. And what we did is to understand the jobs done in using this equipment and the pains and gains that the jobs produced in using the equipment. And so we realized that in using this equipment created pains. So our approach is to try to address these pains associated with the use of equipment while enhancing the gain with flexibility. So in a way, the flexibility provision is not free floating, it's embedded in the use of the equipment. And so, well, you can have the detail in the deliverable that we produce, but eventually we get 5 higher order gains or value propositions. So the first one is optimize, make the most, avoid waste. This was a concern expressed by most of them. So it could be money waste, like I'm not charging the car at the right times, and I'm paying more than I should. Or it could be I'm not making the most of my PV, my solar generation, and I want to do it. Or it could be carbon waste. I'm not being efficient in terms of emission. So this selling flexibility with this idea that this is the gain created, that you are going to optimize, you are going to make the most of your equipment, and you are going to avoid waste, could work for some consumers. For another value proposition is selling flex. And you can sell flex in communicating the monetary gains, or also communicating the symbolic gains, like in terms of being an environmental champion. That would be one symbolic gain. So you are a good neighbor or a good citizen, because only by providing flexibility we can make a green grid. The third value proposition is sharing flex. So in this case, this value proposition would appeal to those that seeks ethical and social value. And so the ways to make the appeal are manifold, but some examples are communicate that you are helping significant others, like you are sharing your flexibility with your neighbors or your friends, that you are creating resilient and self-sufficient communities that can rely on renewable production to survive, and they do not need to depend from foreign countries or from the wider grid, so that you are going to be resilient and autonomous, and also that you can create this surplus at the local level to invest in other things, like improving the sports center or improving the roads or cleaning the parks or whatever. The fourth value proposition is learn, discover, and improve. And this fits very well with this episteme motivation and also with economic gains. So another way of selling flexibility is that by providing flexibility, and because you are going to have these devices and this app installed, you and the aggregator is going to monitor your consumption. Well, this data can be used to make suggestions for you. So they will provide you recommendations on which equipment may help you optimize or reduce your bill or reduce your emissions. And they can also advise you on new services that can be energy services or even cross-sectoral services. And also you will learn to improve your energy management, because with these devices you will learn the consumption of your oven and the price of this consumption at different times of the days. So you can, even if your practice or your time schedule allows, you may restructure your practice to do whatever you want to do, reduce your bill, reduce your emissions, or reduce the energy consumption. And the final value proposition is having access to better infrastructure, because of the data involved, because that's the thing with flexibility provision. We are getting two things from flexibility provision. We are getting kilowatts, but we are getting also data. So, and thanks to this data, we can improve the infrastructure. So at the individual level, one value proposition could be having equipment. And this could work with these people that have low flexibility capital, that they don't have the equipment. So one way of enticing consumers to participate is, for instance, to provide access to equipment in exchange for flexibility. So I give you air conditioning, or I give you a heat pump, but in exchange you commit to provide flexibility these days and these times. I can give it entirely for free, or I can give it at a discount in exchange for this flexibility. But also at the collective level, we can get access to better infrastructure, and this may appeal again to these people that look for the social value, because it's by understanding the individual loads and individual abilities to provide flexibility that we can devise, for instance, a better collective EV charger system, and we can direct people to different charging points thanks to this data. So these 5 value propositions can be granularly adapted to fit the different forms of value that different profiles of people look for. And also, these value propositions can be formulated as products, services, or prices. So any value proposition can be communicated as a product, as a service, and in the case of energy, also as a tariff, which is a variation of service. So for some people, we call them gadgets, they need to have something physical. So energy is so abstract that they get lost. So they understand it better when what you are selling is a device. And this is the productized version of the value proposition. So what we are telling them is that we sell them a device that optimizes the charging of their electrical vehicle, and they are actually buying the device. But by buying the device, they are providing flexibility, because with this device will switch on and off the charging of the EV, adapting to the needs of the grids. So for them, they are saving money or emissions or whatever is the core value for them, and they have is less complex, because this idea of flexibility provision is super complex for people, and that's it. I'm buying this device, and with this I get this benefit. Easy. The second version, or the second option, is to formulate the value proposition as a service. And this is, sorry, I didn't say, but the others, these are examples taken from companies, mostly in UK, where there's already a market for flexibility. In my country, in Spain, we don't have this yet. So in another way of showing this value proposition is with a service. So what you are buying is a service whereby the provider, the aggregator, commits to optimize the charge of your IV. So the benefit you get is a discount, because they will optimize the charging, and what is actually being done is that they are providing flexibility to the grid. Again, because they are switching on and off the device according to the signals of the other market actors. And a variation of the servitized value proposition is tariffs. So even a simpler way, you can offer a tariff, and this tariff comprises or implies a flexibility provision. So Octopus have this smart tariff for the electrical vehicle, when what they actually do is enable a flexibility provision, and they work in the same way. They switch on and off the charging depending on the cost. So they try to optimize the cost, but because they play with your device, they are providing also, or they are creating the potential for flexibility provision for the grid. And finally, because not all consumers are equal, you can also, we found that it would work better if we don't have a single value proposition, but if we do branded models, so that we can better adapt to the value sought and the gains expected by consumers. So similar to the example below, that is a sample that applies to something else, we can customize the strength of the value proposition or the flexibility provision, and then communicate like different models. So you can have a smart charging tariff, that is, you can have a pro charging tariff where you will get a discount on your bills, but you will also get this advice on how to improve, or which equipment it will be good for you, or maybe it's worthwhile for you to install a solar panel or something else, or heating. And the champion model, where you get the two services before, but you also get the opportunity to share or sell your gains with your neighbors, for instance, that the others wouldn't allow. So after all this work, so the main conclusions or takeaways of this exercise is, the first thing is that consumers are not energy experts, and many do not want to be. So when you start telling people about the grid needs, the DCO, the TCO, their mind blows up and they don't want to hear any more about it. So we think that we have to find ways to embed flexibility provision in products, in services, and not complicating this in excess. Although there's always some consumers that want to know more, and we have to be ready to explain this to them. Another thing is that they want fair deals, so they are not willing to, so they are not heroes. So they are not willing to go through the discomfort of providing flexibility for nothing, just for the sake of the grid, just because the grid needs them. So we have to make a balance between the benefits for the grid and the benefits for themselves. But as I said, the benefits are manifold, and they can be communicated in different ways depending on the profile. And also another key conclusion is that one size doesn't fit all, and we need to customize the value proposition. So we need to propose things in different ways to different profiles. What we don't know yet is the matching. So which profiles prefer which value proposition, and this is a matter for further research also in our project. And this is important also because this may create a problem for standardization. So for the aggregator, or the aggregator business model relies on standardization. So the more they have to customize, the more complex is the management of the business. But at the same time, if they don't customize, they won't have enough critical mass to make their business model sustainable. So we have to reach a balance between the two for this to work. So we think that studying flexibility and the flexumer is super interesting because it's like glimpsing into the future and building the future. And we have like a white sheet where everything, well, a lot of things needs to be built. So, but we don't have all the answers yet. So we think that we need further testing. We need experiments to check which value proposition works with whom. So depending on the residential characteristics, maybe with people with certain equipment respond better to some value proposition. We need to learn that and understand that and test that. We also realized that there's a market layer, but there's also a technological layer and a governance layer. And unless we work on the three simultaneously, value is not going to be created, because sometimes the resource integration process is not interrupted due to the aggregator, and the consumer is because of the regulatory framework or because another institutional arrangement that it prevents this integration. So we need to work on the three layers simultaneously. Also, of course, we need to address energy justice concerns. As we said, people with better capital, better equipment are more have an easier way to become flexumers. So we can create a vicious cycle. So people that already have the resources buy the equipment that allows them to provide flexibility in exchange for money, and the people that don't have the equipment have even less possibilities to provide flexibility. They get even less money, so they get into the trap, and the others get more and more. So we need to find ways to break these cycles, and one way is this idea of access to infrastructure in exchange for flexibility provision. This could be a way to bridge these energy justice concerns. And also an important thing is that initial moves shape future consumer expectations. So if in the industry or in a setting, in a country, aggregators start offering all incentives, economic incentives, well, this will prevent other forms of value in the future. So if we set the playing field at you only provide flexibility when you are paid, then some of the value propositions will ever be realized. This sharing will ever be realized. This access to equipment will ever be realized. So it's important to think, aggregators need to think how they are going to sequence and plan their entry in the market, because what they do today will shape their options tomorrow. And this is it. I think that we are now ready to start the question and answer part.
Yeah, thank you very much.